Canada. The true north, strong and free, a beacon of peace and prosperity, or so it seemed. The image we all clung to is fading. Cracks are appearing, spider-webbing across the once pristine facade. A sense of unease is settling, a creeping fear that the Canada we knew is slipping away. The fault lines are deep, running beneath the surface of Canadian society for decades. Quebec nationalism, a simmering ember, threatens to reignite into a full-blown inferno. Out west, the prairies rumble with discontent, fueled by resentment towards a federal government perceived as deaf to their concerns. The economy, once a source of national pride, is now a battleground. The energy sector, the lifeblood of the West, feels strangled by environmental regulations. Meanwhile, the Atlantic provinces struggle to stay afloat, burdened by unemployment and outward migration. In the halls of power, the political discourse has grown increasingly toxic. Partisanship trumps pragmatism, and compromise is a dirty word. The Canadian mosaic, once celebrated for its diversity, is showing signs of strain as regional identities assert themselves. Is this the beginning of the end for Canada? Can a nation so divided find common ground? Or are we witnessing the slow, agonizing demise of a once great nation, a cautionary tale of unity lost and dreams shattered? Quebec, the birthplace of French Canada, is a really special and important part of Canada. It's like a unique piece in a giant puzzle. Because of things that happened long ago, Quebec has always struggled with belonging in Canada. We're not asking Quebec is different, but those differences can work within Canada's rules. Quebec's desire to be separate from Canada is like embers in a fireplace, sometimes flaring up into big problems. It reminds everyone that Canada staying together is not a sure thing. We still remember the times Quebec almost voted to leave Canada. Those close calls really shook the country, and the government in Ottawa still worries about it. The idea of Quebec separating is always there, a big reminder of Quebec's uncertain future in Canada. The Parti Québécois, the political party that wants Quebec to be its own country, might not be in charge right now, but the dream of a separate Quebec is still alive. Some people still really want it, and you can hear people talking about it all over Montreal. The idea of Quebec being its own country, a safe place for French language and culture, is still a powerful idea. Gap 2S. Quebec also feels different from the rest of Canada because it seems like its values and goals don't match up. Whether it's about language, culture, money, or social programs, Quebec often does its own thing. This back and forth between everyone staying together and Quebec wanting its own way is the heart of the problem. It's a problem that continues to shape Canada and maybe even could cause Canada to come apart. A thousand miles west of Quebec, a different kind of discontent brews on the vast Canadian prairies. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, the breadbasket of the nation, are gripped by a sense of alienation, a feeling that their contributions are unappreciated and their voices unheard in the distant halls of power in Ottawa. This Western alienation, a simmering resentment that has long been a part of the Canadian political landscape, has reached a fever pitch in recent years. Fueled by economic anxieties, environmental regulations seen as hostile to their interests, and a perception that Ottawa is deaf to their concerns, many in the West are questioning the very foundations of Confederation. Alberta, the economic engine of the West and the heartland of Canada's energy industry, feels particularly aggrieved. The province's oil and gas sector, a mainstay of the Canadian economy, feels under siege, targeted by environmental policies perceived as existential threats. This economic anxiety has morphed into a potent political force, fueling calls for greater autonomy and even outright separation. The simmering anger in the West is not just about economics, however. It's about respect, recognition, and a sense of belonging. Many in the West feel ignored, their values dismissed, their way of life under attack by an urban, eastern elite out of touch with the realities of life on the prairies. This sense of alienation, this feeling of being on the outside looking in, is a dangerous crack in the Canadian edifice. Atlantic Drift, adrift in the Confederation Sea. While Quebec wrestles with its identity and the West fumes with resentment, Canada's Atlantic provinces face a different set of challenges. Tethered to the eastern edge of the nation, Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island often feel like distant outposts, forgotten in the national narrative. Economic stagnation, dwindling populations, and a sense of being left behind have fueled a growing sense of disillusionment with Confederation. Once vibrant fishing and manufacturing industries have withered in the face of globalization and changing economic tides, leaving behind communities grappling with high unemployment and a lack of opportunity. The exodus of young people, forced to seek opportunities elsewhere, further deepens the sense of despair. The lifeblood of these provinces is slowly draining away, leaving behind an aging population and a palpable sense of uncertainty about the future. The Atlantic provinces, once staunch supporters of Confederation, are increasingly questioning their place within Canada. The economic benefits of remaining part of the Federation seem less clear, while the costs of staying, in terms of lost autonomy and missed opportunities, appear to be growing. The Atlantic provinces, once firmly anchored within Confederation, are slowly drifting, their future uncertain. Part 1. Quebec, a future built on freedom. Quebec, the strong and independent heart of French Canada, has always done things its own way. For a long time, the dream of a free Quebec, a country all its own, has been a small but steady flame. This flame is kept alive by a special language, culture, and history. Could this be the time that small flame turns into a huge fire? There are good reasons to think about Quebec being independent, especially when it comes to money. If Quebec didn't have to share money with the rest of Canada, it could control its own economy. Quebec has lots of natural resources, skilled workers, and a good location. It could become a very successful place on its own. Quebec doesn't like Canada's energy plans, especially using the oil from Alberta. This is another reason why it might want to be independent. A free Quebec could make its own choices about energy. It could focus on being environmentally friendly, like many countries in Europe. The real question isn't if Quebec to be independent, but if it. The world is changing. Countries are working together in new ways. A free Quebec, located between Europe and North America, could become an important player on the world stage. The idea of independence, the chance to build its own future, might be too exciting for Quebec to pass up. Alberta, riding the energy dragon south. Alberta, the energy heartland of Canada, finds itself at a crossroads. Blessed with vast reserves of oil and gas, Alberta has long chafed under the yoke of federal policies perceived as hostile to its interests. The energy sector, the lifeblood of the Alberta economy, feels under siege, strangled by regulations and starved for investment. The allure of joining the United States, a nation built on energy independence and economic freedom, grows stronger by the day. As a state within the U.S., Alberta could finally unleash its full economic potential, accessing new markets, attracting investment, and securing its energy future for generations to come. The cultural fit is undeniable. Alberta, with its rugged individualism, entrepreneurial spirit, and deep-seated belief in self-reliance, has more in common with Texas than Toronto. Joining the U.S. would be a homecoming of sorts, a return to its ideological roots. The economic benefits are undeniable. Lower taxes, less regulation, and access to U.S. markets would unleash an economic boom, propelling Alberta to new heights of prosperity. The political calculus is clear. Alberta's future, its very survival, may lie in embracing its destiny as the 51st state. Saskatchewan, the Prairie Reawakening. Saskatchewan, the breadbasket of Canada, has long been a reluctant partner in Confederation. Its vast prairies, stretching as far as the eye can see, belie a deep-seated sense of alienation. a feeling of being ignored and misunderstood by the powers that be in Ottawa. The cultural ties that bind Saskatchewan to the Canadian heartland are fraying. Saskatchewan's values, hard work, self-reliance, and a deep connection to the land resonate more strongly with the American heartland than with the urban centers of Canada. The economic case for joining the U.S. is compelling. Saskatchewan's agricultural might, unleashed from the shackles of Canadian trade policy, could flourish in the open markets of the U.S. The energy sector, eager to escape the regulatory stranglehold of Ottawa, would find a welcoming home in the energy-hungry United States. Saskatchewan, long a sleeping giant, is awakening to the possibility of a different future, a future unshackled from the constraints of Confederation. The allure of the American dream, the promise of prosperity and self-determination, may prove too strong for Saskatchewan to resist. British Columbia, a tale of two coasts. British Columbia, a province of stunning beauty and stark contrasts, finds itself torn between two worlds. Coastal British Columbia, cosmopolitan and outward-looking, is drawn to the dynamism and diversity of the Pacific Rim. Interior British Columbia, with its rugged mountains and independent spirit, feels a kinship with the American West. The fault lines within British Columbia run deep, threatening to split the province in two. Metro Vancouver, a global city with a distinctly Asian flavor, may choose to go it alone, becoming a city-state in the mold of Singapore or Hong Kong. Interior British Columbia, meanwhile, might seek its fortunes south of the border, aligning itself with Idaho or Washington state. The economic and cultural ties are strong, and the prospect of greater autonomy and closer integration with the U.S. economy may prove irresistible. British Columbia, once a bastion of Canadian unity, is now a microcosm of the forces tearing the nation apart. The future of British Columbia, whether as a unified province or as fragmented entities, hangs in the balance. Manitoba and the Territories, caught in the middle. Manitoba and the Territories, vast, resource-rich, and often overlooked, find themselves caught in the middle of Canada's unraveling. Their fate, uncertain and largely dependent on the choices of their neighbors, is a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of national breakups. Manitoba, with its central location and diverse economy, could become a battleground between competing forces. The western half of the province, with its strong agricultural ties to Saskatchewan, might opt to join a Western States Compact. Winnipeg, Manitoba's capital and a bastion of Canadian identity, might fight to remain part of a diminished Canada. The territories, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, face a unique set of challenges. Rich in natural resources but sparsely populated, they lack the economic and political clout to chart their own course. They could become wards of the state, absorbed into larger entities like Alberta or the Western States Compact, or remain as semi-autonomous entities under the protection of the U.S. or a rump Canada. The fate of Manitoba and the Territories is a stark reminder that the breakup of a nation is not a clean or predictable affair. It is a messy, unpredictable process, with winners and losers, and a host of unintended consequences. Ontario, the heart doesn't follow. Ontario, the economic and political heart of Canada, watches the unfolding drama with a mix of disbelief and apprehension. Long accustomed to being the center of the Canadian universe, Ontario is now confronted with the possibility of becoming a diminished entity, its power and influence waning. The fault lines within Ontario are becoming increasingly apparent. Northern Ontario, with its resource-based economy and cultural affinity for the American Midwest, might choose to align itself with Michigan or Ohio, seeking economic opportunity and a political culture more aligned with its values. Southern Ontario, home to Toronto and the province's economic engine, faces a more uncertain future. It could try to hold on to what remains of Canada, becoming the center of a smaller, more fragmented federation. Alternatively, it could strike out on its own, transforming itself into a city-state, a North American version of Singapore or Hong Kong. The future of Ontario, once considered synonymous with the future of Canada, is now very much in doubt. The unraveling of Canada has forced Ontario to confront its own internal divisions and to contemplate a future where it is no longer the dominant force in the land. Atlantic Canada, a new tide rising. Atlantic Canada, long the bastion of Canadian traditionalism, watches the unfolding drama with a sense of apprehension and a glimmer of hope. Apprehension at the prospect of a fractured federation, a loss of the ties that bind, but also a glimmer of hope, a chance to break free from the shackles of a system that has often left them behind. The economic case for joining the United States is compelling. Freed from the constraints of Canadian trade policy, Atlantic Canada could leverage its strategic location and skilled workforce to become a gateway for U.S. trade and investment. The tourism industry, a vital part of the regional economy, would benefit from closer ties to the massive U.S. market. The cultural ties between Atlantic Canada and New England run deep, forged over centuries of shared history and maritime heritage. Joining the U.S. would be a homecoming of sorts, a return to a shared cultural and economic space. For Atlantic Canada, the breakup of Canada presents both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is to navigate the uncertainty and upheaval of a fractured federation. The opportunity is to forge a new destiny, one that embraces its history, leverages its strengths, and secures a more prosperous future for generations to come. The price of independence. Weighing the costs of freedom. The potential breakup of Canada is a political and social earthquake, but its aftershocks would reverberate most strongly in the economic realm. For provinces contemplating a leap into the unknown, the allure of greater autonomy and closer ties with the United States must be carefully weighed against the potential costs and disruptions of severing ties with Canada. The immediate impact would be a period of profound economic uncertainty. Currencies would fluctuate, trade relationships would be renegotiated, and investment would likely slow to a trickle as businesses and individuals grapple with the new realities. The social safety net, a cornerstone of Canadian identity, would face immense pressure as provinces adjust to potentially lower revenues and the loss of federal transfer payments. However, amidst the turbulence, an opportunity for renewal emerges. Freed from the constraints of federal policies perceived as outdated or detrimental to their interests, provinces could embark on ambitious economic reforms tailored to their unique strengths and opportunities. Tax codes could be streamlined, regulations could be eased, and strategic investments could be made to attract businesses and foster innovation. The key question is whether the potential long-term benefits of such economic liberation outweigh the short-term costs and uncertainties. The answer, like the Canadian landscape itself, is vast and varied, depending on the specific circumstances of each province and their chosen path. Unleashing the economic engines, Alberta and Saskatchewan. Embrace the American dream. For Alberta and Saskatchewan, the economic calculus of joining the United States is particularly compelling. As energy and agricultural powerhouses, these provinces have long chafed under federal policies perceived as hindering their growth and limiting their access to global markets. Integration with the U.S. economy, a long-held aspiration for many in the West, would represent a seismic shift, unleashing their full economic potential. Alberta, with its vast oil and gas reserves, would find a natural home in the energy-hungry United States. Access to U.S. markets, combined with a more favorable regulatory environment, would unleash a wave of investment and production, propelling Alberta's energy sector to new heights. The economic benefits would ripple throughout the province, boosting employment, wages, and government revenues. Saskatchewan, the breadbasket of Canada, would also experience an agricultural renaissance. Freed from the constraints of Canadian supply management and trade barriers, Saskatchewan's farmers would gain access to the vast U.S. market, boosting demand for their high-quality wheat, canola, and other agricultural products. The economic windfall would transform rural communities, revitalizing towns and attracting new investment. The integration of Alberta and Saskatchewan into the U.S. economy would be a win-win scenario, benefiting both the provinces and their new American partners. It would secure vital energy and food resources for the U.S., while unleashing the economic potential of two dynamic provinces eager to embrace the American dream. A Pacific powerhouse, British Columbia's coastal transformation. British Columbia, perched on Canada's Pacific coast, faces a unique set of economic opportunities and challenges in a post-breakup scenario. While the province's interior might find common cause with its southern neighbors, aligning itself with the U.S. Pacific Northwest, coastal British Columbia, particularly Metro Vancouver, could chart a different course, transforming itself into a global trading hub and a magnet for investment. Freed from the constraints of federal policies perceived as hindering its growth, Vancouver could leverage its strategic location, world-class infrastructure, and highly skilled workforce to become a gateway for trade and investment between North America and Asia. The city's deep ties to the Pacific Rim, already evident in its vibrant multicultural population and thriving business links, would flourish in this new environment. The economic benefits of such a transformation would be significant. Vancouver would attract major multinational corporations seeking a foothold in North America, while local businesses would thrive on increased trade and investment. The city's real estate market, already one of the most expensive in the world, would likely experience further appreciation as global investors flock to this new economic powerhouse. However, such rapid growth would not be without its challenges. Vancouver would need to address issues of affordability, infrastructure strain, and social cohesion as it adapts to its new role as a global city. The city's identity, deeply rooted in its Canadian heritage, would also evolve as it embraces its global destiny. Ontario's fork in the road, seeking shelter in the American heartland. Ontario, long the economic engine of Canada, faces a more uncertain economic future in a post-breakup scenario. Stripped of its traditional role as the heart of Confederation, Ontario would need to adapt quickly to a new reality, one where its economic and political clout is diminished. Southern Ontario, home to Toronto and the province's manufacturing base, would likely experience the most significant economic disruption. The loss of its captive market in the rest of Canada would be a blow, forcing businesses to compete more aggressively for a slice of the U.S. market. The auto industry, a key pillar of Ontario's economy, would be particularly vulnerable, facing stiff competition from established U.S. manufacturers. Northern Ontario, with its resource-based economy, might find a more natural fit within the U.S. economic system. Its mining and forestry industries could benefit from closer ties to U.S. markets and a more favorable regulatory environment. However, the transition would not be without its challenges, as communities adapt to a new economic reality. Ontario's economic future would depend on its ability to adapt, innovate, and forge new partnerships. Closer integration with the U.S. Midwest, leveraging its manufacturing expertise and skilled workforce, could offer a path to prosperity. However, it would require a fundamental shift in mindset, embracing a more outward-looking, globally competitive approach. Atlantic renewal, riding the waves of U.S. integration. For Atlantic Canada, long grappling with economic stagnation and a sense of being left behind, the breakup of Canada could present a unique opportunity for renewal. Closer integration with the U.S. economy, a prospect viewed with both hope and apprehension, could breathe new life into the region, unlocking its potential as a hub for trade, tourism, and innovation. The fishing industry, a cornerstone of Atlantic Canada's heritage, and a vital source of employment, could benefit from greater access to U.S. markets and a more streamlined regulatory environment. Tourism, already a major economic driver, would flourish as closer ties to the U.S. attract a surge in visitors eager to experience the region's natural beauty and cultural charm. The energy sector, particularly offshore oil and gas development, could also experience a resurgence. U.S. investment and expertise would be critical in unlocking the region's energy potential, creating jobs and boosting government revenues. However, this would need to be balanced with environmental concerns, ensuring that development is sustainable and protects the region's pristine coastline. Atlantic Canada's success in a post-breakup scenario would depend on its ability to leverage its strengths, embrace innovation, and forge strong partnerships with its U.S. neighbors. While challenges would undoubtedly arise, the potential for economic renewal, driven by closer ties to the dynamic U.S. economy, should not be underestimated. The shifting sands of identity redefining Canadian in a post-breakup world. The potential breakup of Canada would send shockwaves far beyond the realm of economics and politics, shaking the very foundations of Canadian identity. For generations, being Canadian has been intricately linked with a sense of shared values, a belief in peace, order, and good government, and a commitment to social justice and inclusivity. But what happens to these ideals when the political entity that embodied them fragments? The immediate aftermath of a breakup would likely be marked by confusion and soul-searching. Provinces that choose to join the United States would undergo a rapid and potentially disorienting process of cultural assimilation, adopting American laws, customs, and social norms. The Canadian flag, once a symbol of unity and national pride, would be lowered, replaced by the Stars and Stripes, a potent visual reminder of the seismic shift that has occurred. Provinces that remain outside the U.S. would face a different set of challenges, redefining what it means to be Canadian in a world where the traditional markers of Canadian identity are no longer universally shared. Would they cling to the old ways, becoming bastions of a bygone era? Or would they forge a new path, embracing their unique regional identities while seeking common ground with their neighbors? The breakup of Canada would not erase the country's history or the values that have shaped it, but it would force Canadians, both individually and collectively, to confront fundamental questions about who they are, what they believe in, and where they belong in a world reshaped by political and cultural fragmentation. Second Amendment. North. The rise of gun culture in a fractured Canada. One of the most immediate and potentially jarring cultural shifts in a post-breakup Canada would be the transformation of gun culture. Canada's long-standing tradition of strict gun control, a source of national pride for many, would be upended as provinces aligning with the United States adopt American gun laws, including the Second Amendment's right to bear arms. The influx of firearms into provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan would be rapid and substantial. Gun shows, a staple of American culture but a rarity in Canada, would become commonplace, offering a wide array of firearms and ammunition to a newly empowered gun-owning population. Shooting ranges would proliferate, catering to a surge in demand for firearms training and recreational shooting. This sudden shift in gun culture would have profound implications for law enforcement, public safety, and the social fabric of these provinces. Police forces, accustomed to dealing with a relatively low level of gun violence, would need to adapt quickly to a more heavily armed populace. Debates over gun control, largely settled in Canada for decades, would reignite, pitting those who embrace the American model of gun rights against those who fear the consequences of increased gun ownership. The rise of gun culture in a fractured Canada would be a stark reminder that cultural change can be swift and unpredictable, particularly in the wake of dramatic political upheaval. It would also highlight the deep cultural divide that exists between Canada and the United States, a divide that transcends political borders and shapes fundamental values and beliefs. The walls come down, immigration and border security in flux. The breakup of Canada would have profound implications for immigration and border security, upending long-standing policies and creating new challenges for provinces navigating their way in a fractured North America. The free movement of people across provincial borders, a cornerstone of Canadian identity, would likely end, replaced by a patchwork of new regulations and border controls. Provinces joining the United States would adopt American immigration laws which are generally more restrictive than Canada's. This could lead to a decrease in immigration to these provinces, as potential newcomers face stricter eligibility requirements and a more complex application process. Existing immigrant communities could also be impacted, facing new challenges related to citizenship, residency, and access to social services. Provinces remaining outside the U.S. would face a different set of choices. They could maintain Canada's tradition of welcoming immigrants, positioning themselves as havens for those seeking a more inclusive and multicultural society, or they could adopt more restrictive policies, prioritizing economic needs or aligning themselves with the immigration policies of their new neighbors. Border security would also become a major concern in a fractured Canada. The long, undefended border between Canada and the United States, once a symbol of the two countries' close relationship, would likely be fortified, with increased surveillance, checkpoints, and patrols. This would have significant implications for trade, travel, and the daily lives of people living along the border. Legal landscapes, navigating the new rules of the game. The breakup of Canada would unleash a legal earthquake, shattering the existing legal framework and forcing provinces to navigate a complex and uncertain legal landscape. Decades of jurisprudence would be thrown into question as provinces grapple with the monumental task of adapting existing laws, drafting new ones, and establishing new legal institutions. Provinces aligning with the United States would undergo a wholesale adoption of American law, replacing the familiar Canadian legal system with its American counterpart. This would involve everything from adopting the U.S. Constitution and its Bill of Rights to implementing state-level legislation governing everything from criminal justice to family law to business regulations. The legal professions in these provinces would experience a period of intense upheaval as lawyers, judges, and legal scholars scramble to master the intricacies of American law. Law schools would revamp their curricula, replacing courses on Canadian law with their American equivalents. Courts would grapple with the challenge of applying American legal principles to cases rooted in Canadian history and social norms. Provinces remaining outside the U.S. would face a different set of legal challenges. They would need to reassess existing laws, renegotiate treaties, and establish new legal frameworks for everything from trade and commerce to extradition and mutual legal assistance. The legal implications of a fractured Canada would be felt for generations, shaping the legal systems and legal cultures of the successor states for decades to come. The cultural mosaic reimagined, embracing change, preserving identity. The potential breakup of Canada would undoubtedly test the limits of its famed multicultural mosaic. The very notion of a unified Canadian identity, built on shared values and a commitment to diversity, would be challenged as provinces chart their own courses, aligning themselves with new partners and embracing new cultural influences. Provinces joining the United States would experience the most dramatic cultural shifts. The influx of American culture, already pervasive in Canada, would intensify, permeating every aspect of life from language and entertainment to food and fashion. The Canadian broadcasting system, a cornerstone of Canadian cultural identity, would likely be dismantled, replaced by American networks and programming. However, it's important to remember that cultural change is not a one-way street. Just as Canadians would be exposed to new influences, they would also bring their own unique perspectives and traditions to their new American homes. The Canadian emphasis on social justice, inclusivity, and community spirit could help to shape a more compassionate and equitable society in parts of the United States. Provinces remaining outside the U.S. would have the opportunity to redefine Canadian identity for a new era. They could choose to emphasize their unique regional cultures, celebrating their distinct histories, languages, and traditions. They could also forge new cultural partnerships with like-minded countries, creating a global network of nations committed to diversity, inclusivity, and social progress. The balkanization of the North, a descent into chaos. The breakup of any nation is a traumatic event, fraught with danger and uncertainty. It is a process that can tear apart the very fabric of society, leaving behind a landscape marked by fear, instability, and conflict. The dissolution of a country is not just a political event, it is a deeply personal and emotional experience for its citizens, who must navigate the treacherous waters of a new and uncertain reality. But the potential fragmentation of Canada, a country long seen as a beacon of stability and peaceful coexistence, carries with it a unique set of risks, threatening to plunge the nation into a period of prolonged chaos and instability. Canada, with its vast landscapes and diverse population, has always been a symbol of unity in diversity. The idea of its breakup is not just a political concern but a cultural and social upheaval that could have far-reaching consequences. The very fabric of Canadian society, woven together by threads of shared history, common values, and mutual trust, could unravel with frightening speed, leaving behind a patchwork of divided and potentially hostile entities. Communities that once lived in harmony could find themselves at odds, driven apart by newfound allegiances and old grievances. The sense of national identity, which has been a cornerstone of Canadian life, could be shattered, leading to a loss of cohesion and a rise in regionalism. The most immediate danger is the potential for violence. As tensions rise and divisions deepen, the likelihood of violent confrontations increases. Protests could quickly escalate into riots, and peaceful demonstrations could turn into battlegrounds. The streets, once safe and bustling with life, could become arenas of conflict, where the rule of law is overshadowed by the rule of force. As the political process breaks down, unable to contain the centrifugal forces tearing the nation apart, frustration could boil over into open conflict. The institutions that once held the country together could become targets of anger and resentment. Government buildings, symbols of authority and stability, could be besieged by angry crowds demanding change. The political landscape could become a minefield, where every step is fraught with danger and every decision could lead to further unrest. Separatist groups, emboldened by their perceived mandate, might resort to force to achieve their objectives. These groups, driven by a desire for independence or greater autonomy, could see the breakdown of central authority as an opportunity to push their agendas. Armed militants could take to the streets, clashing with police and other security forces, turning peaceful protests into violent confrontations. The dream of a new nation could quickly become a nightmare of bloodshed and chaos. Loyalists, determined to preserve the Union, could take up arms in response, sparking a cycle of violence and retribution. These groups, seeing the threat to their vision of a united Canada, could mobilize to counter the separatists. The result could be a deadly game of cat and mouse where each act of violence begets another, and the cycle of retribution spirals out of control. The streets could become battlefields where neighbor turns against neighbor, and the bonds of community are torn asunder. The disintegration of the Canadian Armed Forces, once a symbol of national unity and a source of pride, would further exacerbate the risk of widespread violence. The military, which has long been a stabilizing force, could find itself divided and in disarray. Soldiers, torn between their duty to the nation and their loyalty to their home provinces, could be forced to choose sides. The once unified force could fracture, leading to a breakdown in command and control, and a rise in regional militias. As soldiers and commanders are forced to choose sides, their loyalties divided between their province of origin and their oath to defend Canada, The military could fracture along regional lines, transforming from a force for order into a potential catalyst for chaos. The chain of command could break down, leading to confusion and disorder. Regional commanders could act independently, furthering their own agendas and exacerbating the conflict. The military, once a bulwark against chaos, could become a source of instability. The economic fallout of a breakup, while potentially beneficial for some provinces in the long run, would also create fertile ground for unrest in the short term. The sudden disruption of trade routes, the collapse of national currencies, and the fragmentation of economic policies could lead to a severe economic downturn. Businesses could close, jobs could be lost, and the standard of living could plummet. The economic hardship could fuel social unrest as people struggle to make ends meet and look for someone to blame. The sudden disruption of trade, the collapse of national currencies, and the potential loss of social safety nets could plunge millions into poverty and despair, fueling social unrest and creating opportunities for extremist groups to exploit the chaos. These groups, seeing the breakdown of order, could step in to fill the void, offering their own solutions and gaining followers. The result could be a rise in extremism, as people, desperate for stability and security, turn to radical ideologies. The social fabric, already frayed, could be torn apart, leading to a descent into chaos. Blood on the maple leaf flashpoints for civil conflict. While the potential for violence would cast a long shadow over a fractured Canada, certain regions stand out as potential flashpoints, where simmering tensions and historical grievances could ignite into open conflict. These areas are not just geographical locations but are deeply rooted in the cultural and political fabric of the nation. The history of protests and civil unrest in Canada, though often overshadowed by the country's peaceful reputation, reveals a latent volatility that could be triggered under the right conditions. These tinderboxes scattered across the Canadian landscape represent the most volatile and unpredictable elements of a breakup scenario, threatening to transform a relatively peaceful divorce into a bloody and protracted struggle. The potential for conflict is not limited to any single region, but is a mosaic of discontent that could erupt simultaneously, overwhelming any efforts at maintaining order. Quebec, with its long history of separatist aspirations and a deep-seated sense of cultural difference, would be the most obvious flashpoint. The province's unique identity and its historical grievances against the federal government have always made it a hotbed for separatist sentiment. The 1995 referendum, which nearly saw Quebec secede from Canada, is a stark reminder of how close the province has come to breaking away. While a negotiated separation is possible, the process would be fraught with tension, particularly if hardline factions on either side feel their interests are being ignored. The delicate balance of power and the need to address the concerns of both the French-speaking majority and the English-speaking minority would make any negotiations incredibly complex and potentially explosive. The specter of violence, a dark stain on Quebec's past, could re-emerge, with paramilitary groups like the FLQ, responsible for bombings and kidnappings in the 1960s and 70s, finding fertile ground for recruitment and renewed acts of terror. The memory of the October crisis, when the FLQ kidnapped and murdered government officials, still lingers in the collective consciousness of Quebecers, serving as a grim reminder of what could happen if tensions boil over. The border between Alberta and British Columbia, once a seamless transition between provinces, could become a militarized zone. The economic disparities and differing political ideologies between these provinces could exacerbate tensions, leading to a situation where border security becomes a significant issue. The once open and friendly border could see checkpoints, patrols, and even military presence disrupting the lives of those who live and work in the border regions. Disputes over resource rights, particularly access to pipelines and ports, could escalate into armed confrontations. The control of natural resources has always been a contentious issue in Canada, and in a scenario where provinces are vying for control, the stakes would be even higher. The economic lifelines of these regions, such as pipelines that transport oil and gas, could become flashpoints for conflict, with each side unwilling to compromise on what they see as vital to their economic survival. The presence of armed militia groups in both provinces, fueled by anti-government sentiment and a siege mentality, would further heighten the risk of violence, turning a dispute over resources into a battle for territory and control. These groups, often operating in the shadows, could emerge as significant players in a conflict, using their knowledge of the terrain and their military training to challenge government forces and assert their own control over key areas. Even within provinces, the potential for conflict would be significant. The divisions within provinces, often along urban-rural lines, could lead to internal strife that further complicates the broader national picture. The struggle for power and resources within provinces could mirror the larger national conflict, creating a multi-layered crisis that is difficult to resolve. In Ontario, a province deeply divided along regional and ideological lines, tensions between urban and rural communities, between supporters of a unified Canada and those who embrace closer ties with the U.S., could erupt into violence. The ideological divide, often manifesting in differing views on governance, economy, and social issues, could lead to clashes that are not just political, but also physical, with each side unwilling to back down. The potential for urban unrest in cities like Toronto, fueled by economic hardship and social dislocation, could further destabilize the region, creating opportunities for criminal gangs and extremist groups to exploit the chaos. The economic disparities and the sense of disenfranchisement among certain groups could lead to protests, riots, and even organized crime, further complicating efforts to maintain peace and order. The urban centers, often seen as the heart of Canadian stability, could become the epicenters of conflict, challenging the very fabric of Canadian society. Ghosts in the machine, the collapse of national systems. Beyond the immediate threat of violence, the breakup of Canada would trigger a cascade of systemic failures, as the institutions that underpin Canadian society struggle to cope with the sudden and dramatic fragmentation of the country. The intricate web of federal agencies, national programs, and shared services, taken for granted for generations, would unravel, leaving behind a patchwork of dysfunctional remnants and a void in essential services. The collapse of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Canada's national police force, would be a particularly destabilizing event, tasked with everything from enforcing federal laws to providing policing services in rural communities. The RCMP's absence would create a security vacuum, leaving vast swaths of the country vulnerable to crime and disorder. Provinces would be forced to scramble to establish their own police forces, a costly and time-consuming process that would likely be inadequate in the short term, leaving communities vulnerable to looting, violence, and vigilante justice. The Canada Revenue Agency, responsible for collecting taxes and administering social programs, would also cease to function, throwing the national economy into further turmoil. The flow of federal transfer payments to provinces, a lifeline for many essential services, would grind to a halt, forcing provinces to make drastic cuts or raise taxes, further fueling resentment and instability. Even seemingly mundane national systems like air traffic control, telecommunications networks, and the electrical grid would be vulnerable to disruption and collapse. The intricate web of inter-provincial agreements and shared infrastructure that underpins these systems would be thrown into disarray, leading to blackouts, communication breakdowns, and transportation chaos, further isolating communities and exacerbating the sense of panic and despair. The breakup of Canada would reverberate far beyond its borders, sending shockwaves across North America and beyond, reshaping the geopolitical landscape and forcing a reassessment of alliances and strategic priorities. The United States, long accustomed to a stable and friendly neighbor to the north, would find itself grappling with a new reality, one fraught with both opportunities and risks. The most immediate concern for the U.S. would be the potential for instability and conflict spilling across its northern border. The influx of refugees fleeing violence or economic hardship, the emergence of armed groups operating along the border, and the potential for territorial disputes between successor states would pose significant security challenges for the U.S., forcing it to increase military patrols, strengthen border security, and potentially even intervene directly to restore order. The economic implications for the U.S. would be mixed. The integration of provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan into the U.S. economy would provide access to valuable resources and create new markets for American goods and services. However, the overall impact on the North American economy would likely be negative in the short term, as trade disruptions, currency fluctuations, and political uncertainty dampen investment and slow economic growth. The breakup of Canada would also have profound implications for global alliances and institutions. Canada's long-standing membership in NATO, its role as a middle power promoting diplomacy and multilateralism, and its reputation as a peacekeeper and honest broker would be diminished, creating a void in international affairs. The Arctic, increasingly a region of strategic importance, would become more volatile, as competing claims over resources and shipping lanes escalate tensions between Arctic nations. Survival in the ruins, navigating the post-breakup world. The potential breakup of Canada is a sobering reminder of the fragility of nations and the speed with which order can descend into chaos. The images of protests and broken infrastructure serve as a stark visual representation of how quickly societal norms can be upended. In such a scenario, the very fabric of daily life is torn apart, leaving citizens to navigate a landscape that is both physically and emotionally unrecognizable. While the exact contours of such an event are impossible to predict, the potential consequences, both for Canadians and for the wider world, are too significant to ignore. The globe spinning and the map of Canada highlight the interconnectedness of our world, where the ripple effects of a national breakup can be felt far beyond its borders. Concerned citizens watching the news are a testament to the anxiety and uncertainty that such a situation would generate. In the face of such uncertainty, individuals and communities must confront the unthinkable, preparing themselves for a future defined by disruption, upheaval, and the need for resilience. Community meetings on disaster preparedness become crucial as they provide a platform for sharing knowledge and resources. Families packing emergency bags and reviewing supplies are taking proactive steps to ensure their safety and well-being in times of crisis. The first step is to develop a realistic assessment of the risks. This involves not only understanding the immediate dangers but also considering the long-term implications. Experts discussing on panels and individuals reading detailed reports are part of a broader effort to gather and disseminate critical information. By analyzing risks comprehensively, communities can better prepare for a range of possible scenarios. This involves understanding the potential for violence, the collapse of essential services, and the economic and social dislocation that would likely follow a breakup. Violent protests and empty grocery shelves are immediate signs of societal breakdown, while closed hospitals indicate a severe strain on healthcare systems. These images underscore the importance of being prepared for a wide array of challenges that could arise. It also means identifying personal vulnerabilities such as reliance on government services, proximity to potential conflict zones, and the ability to cope with economic hardship. People standing in line for government services and maps highlighting conflict zones provide a visual representation of these vulnerabilities. The stress and anxiety on people's faces during economic hardship further emphasize the need for personal and community resilience. Once the risks are understood, individuals and communities can begin to develop contingency plans. Group planning sessions and families discussing their strategies are essential steps in this process. Writing on a whiteboard symbolizes the collaborative effort required to create effective plans that address various aspects of survival and recovery. This includes establishing emergency communication networks, securing essential supplies like food, water, and medicine, and developing skills that would be valuable in a crisis, such as first aid, self-defense, and basic survival techniques. Emergency communication devices ensure that people can stay connected even when traditional networks fail. Storing food and water is a fundamental aspect of preparedness, while first aid training sessions equip individuals with the skills needed to handle medical emergencies. It also means building strong social networks and fostering a spirit of cooperation, as communities will need to rely on each other for support in the absence of functioning government institutions. Community gatherings and neighbors helping each other illustrate the power of collective action. People working together to solve problems and support one another is a cornerstone of resilience in times of crisis. The potential breakup of Canada is a stark reminder that the stability and prosperity we often take for granted are not guaranteed. Busy city streets and people enjoying everyday activities are scenes of normalcy that could be disrupted. Historical footage of stable times serves as a poignant reminder of what is at stake and the importance of safeguarding our way of life. By confronting this possibility head-on, by preparing for the worst while hoping for the best, individuals and communities can increase their chances of weathering the storm and emerging from the ruins with their values intact and their spirits unbroken. Determined faces and scenes of people rebuilding highlight the resilience and strength of the human spirit. Communities coming together after a disaster demonstrate that, even in the face of adversity, hope and solidarity can prevail. The unraveling. The Canada we thought we knew, a nation woven from dreams of unity and aspirations of collective progress, stands at the precipice. The threads of our confederation, once strong and vibrant, are fraying, weakened by internal divisions, economic anxieties, and the siren song of a different future. The center, struggling to hold, can feel the centrifugal forces pulling at its edges, threatening to tear the nation apart. From the restless streets of Montreal, where the ghosts of separatism still linger, to the windswept plains of Alberta, where resentment towards the east burns with a quiet intensity, the signs are undeniable. The Canadian experiment, once a model of peaceful coexistence and shared prosperity, is facing its greatest test. It is a test of our values, our commitment to dialogue, and our willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The potential consequences of a breakup are daunting. The specter of civil unrest, the collapse of national institutions, the economic uncertainty, and the geopolitical fallout paint a bleak picture, a stark warning of what we stand to lose. The Canada we know, a nation respected on the world stage for its peacekeeping efforts, its commitment to multilateralism, and its embrace of diversity, could disappear, leaving behind a fractured landscape of uncertainty and division. But amidst the fear and uncertainty, a flicker of hope remains. The potential for renewal, for forging new paths, for creating a future that reflects the aspirations of all its people, should not be dismissed. It is a hope that rests on our ability to engage in honest dialogue, to bridge the divides that separate us, and to find common ground amidst the differences. The allure of independence, the burden of freedom. The allure of independence, the siren song of self-determination, holds a powerful sway, particularly for those who feel marginalized, ignored, or left behind. The promise of charting one's own course, free from the constraints of a perceived distant and unresponsive federal government, can be intoxicating. But freedom, like any potent elixir, must be approached with caution, its intoxicating aroma tempered by a sober assessment of its potential side effects. The economic case for independence, while compelling for some, is not without its challenges. The transition from a unified nation to a collection of independent or semi-autonomous entities would be fraught with uncertainty. Trade relationships would be renegotiated, currencies would fluctuate, and investment would likely slow as businesses and individuals grapple with the new realities. The social safety net, a cornerstone of Canadian identity, would face immense pressure as provinces adjust to potentially lower revenues and the loss of federal transfer payments. The cultural and social implications are equally complex. The Canadian mosaic, celebrated for its diversity and inclusivity, could face new strains as provinces grapple with issues of identity, immigration, and social cohesion. The very definition of Canadian, once a source of pride and unity, could become a point of contention, a source of division rather than shared identity. The decision to stay or go, to preserve the Union or embrace a different future, is not one to be taken lightly. It is a decision that demands careful consideration, a sober assessment of the potential benefits and risks, and a willingness to engage in honest and respectful dialogue. The future of Canada, in whatever form it takes, depends on it. A call to reflection, a plea for dialogue. We stand at a crossroads, a pivotal moment in the Canadian journey. The path ahead is uncertain, shrouded in the fog of uncertainty and the weight of momentous decisions. The choices we make today will reverberate for generations, shaping the destiny of this nation and the lives of all who call Canada home. It is a time for reflection, for open and honest dialogue, for a collective reassessment of who we are and what we stand for. The challenges we face are real. The anger, the frustration, the sense of alienation felt by many are not to be dismissed. But these challenges, daunting as they may seem, do not diminish the value of our shared history, the strength of our institutions, or the potential for finding common ground. Let us not succumb to the politics of division, the allure of simplistic solutions, or the seductive whispers of fear and resentment. Let us instead choose the path of dialogue, of empathy, of seeking to understand the perspectives of those who see the world differently. Let us engage in a national conversation, not as adversaries, but as fellow citizens, united by a common destiny. The future of Canada is not preordained. It is a future we must write together, through courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to the values that have defined this nation since its inception. Let history remember us not as the generation that allowed Canada to unravel, but as the generation that found the strength, the wisdom, and the will to forge a new path, a path towards a more just, more prosperous, and more united future.